Ukrainian political and economic expert Taras Zagorodniy commented on the possibility of internal conflicts in Russia. "I believe more in conflicts between local authorities and the federal government of the Russian Federation. That is, when it is the local authorities, not the people, who will confront the center. If there is no money in the local budget, if there is no ability to support infrastructure, schools, public transportation, and everything else, then local authorities will have to answer, because people will turn to the local authorities, not Putin," he emphasized in an interview with Glavred. According to the expert, a similar situation developed in the Soviet Union when it began to collapse, when there was no money to support local elites, and no money was coming from Moscow. Of course, there are still Russian deposits, another 60 trillion rubles, and the Russian government will still try to confiscate these deposits. It's already implementing mechanisms that prevent the population from withdrawing money from banks. This is being done with vague wording. If a bank sees transactions that it deems uncontrolled, it has the right to freeze the money. This phenomenon has become widespread, he explained. Zagorodniy also recalled that before the collapse of the USSR, a confiscatory monetary reform was carried out. Russia is still afraid to do this, but these processes are also underway, and as early as the first quarter of 2026, we will see big surprises in Russia that are already being prepared, he added. Expert Georgy Tuka spoke about the chances of an internal rebellion in the aggressor state, Russia. According to him, theoretically, a move by the high circles is possible. However, in recent years, especially the last two, Putin and his entourage have systematically and quite effectively eliminated any dissent. As a result, there is virtually no real opposition left in the country. At the same time, the expert believes that the struggle between the Kremlin towers still exists in Russia. This process is still ongoing, and once again the Kovalchuk brothers seem to have regained their influence in the behind-the-scenes struggle. It's difficult to predict how the struggle between the Kremlin towers will develop. However, so far I don't see even a hint that any active processes could unfold there in the near future, Tuka added. Earlier, an unexpected scenario emerged of a rebellion in Russia, with Putin being snuff-boxed in the head. Russian security forces are in favor of continuing the war, as they understand that stopping the fighting will sooner or later land them in court.
Several nations and environmental groups on Friday slammed proposals put forward at the UN climate talks in Brazil, saying they failed to explicitly mention the cause of global warming, the burning of fuels such as oil, gas, and coal. According to Associated Press, 36 nations have objected to a proposal drafted by Conference President André Correia do Lago of host Brazil. "We are not asking for an empty document. We are not asking for an empty announcement," said Irene Vélez, the Colombian representative at COP30. The proposals, released on what was to be the last day of the talks, came on the heels of a fire on Thursday that briefly spread through pavilions of the conference known as COP30 on the edge of the Amazon, prompting evacuations. Officials said 13 people were treated for smoke inhalation. A key text among host Brazil's proposals, called the Mutirão decision, for an indigenous term that means to act together, deals with 4 difficult issues. They include financial aid for vulnerable countries hit hardest by climate change and getting countries to toughen up their national plans to reduce earth-warming emissions. Then there's the dispute over whether to create a detailed roadmap for the world to phase out the fossil fuels that are largely driving Earth's increasing extreme weather. Any such plan would expand on a single sentence to transition away from fossil fuels that was agreed upon 2 years ago at the climate talks in Dubai. But no timetable or process was spelled out for that, and powerful oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia and Russia oppose it. More than 80 nations have called for stronger directions, and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva also pushed for it earlier this month. On phasing out fossil fuels, the Mutireo decision says that it acknowledges that the global transition towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate-resilient development is irreversible and the trend of the future.
A los medios de comunicación, a los pueblos del mundo que hoy nos escuchan, thank you very much for being here. Ignore. This COP cannot end without a clear, just, and equitable roadmap for the global phase-out of fossil fuels. We are not asking for an empty document. We are not asking for an empty announcement. We believe there is a consensus rising from the people of the world. As we governments are responsible for decisions that will impact future generations, we have the moral responsibility to echo the people's demands for climate justice and for the elimination of fossil fuels. We must leave this COP with a global roadmap that guides us, not symbolically, but concretely, our collective efforts to phase out fossil fuels. We do not want a voluntary gesture. We need a global ownership. We need a mapa do camino that truly moves us forward in the need to phase out fossil fuels.
Transitioning means replacing the old with the new. So phasing out fossil fuels can only happen with a substantial growth in renewable energy. That is the energy transition we have to realize for our climate, for our economies, and for our security. And it will be hard work with a difficult road ahead of us. Patience and focus will be key to get through the tough decisions and the details in getting the execution right. And that is why this working conference will be so critical in getting this pledge to truly lift off. Thank you.
And now, here today, we are in a difficult situation. We have seen the text provided by the presidency. It's not enough. We need to work, and we have time to make it better. We need to ensure that this COP provide a clear response plan to the ambition and implementation gap that we have seen under the NDCs. A plan that responds, once again, I want to mention the word, align with science.
We agreed to transitioning away from fossil fuels, and everyone knows, common sense, that requires a plan, because it is not happening. And that's all we want, a plan to act on what we committed 2 years ago. Thank you very much.